Hello everybody, it's me again, but before we get into the video itself, I need to at least bring up something. I do apologize in advance if this video came out a little later than usual, but certain things have happened. If you haven't seen my community post up to now, well, honestly, it's because my Wi-Fi kind of crashed on me and I wasn't able to do the video on time. I don't want to jinx myself into thinking what happened, but I am going to say that for the time of making this video, I do hope that this video comes out, and along with another video that it will be part of Arina Tanemura month. So for those who have been very patiently, I do thank you for your support and everything. As for the rest of you guys, it's time for me to talk about my Magical Girl podcast, and without further ado, let's begin. Hello everybody, it's Flamingo right here, back again for another Magical Girl podcast video. And you know what? It's March. And what that means for me is that, yeah, we'll come back to that Star Giants fiasco in a bit. But for right now, there's kind of something that I wanted to get off my chest anyways. In this case, I've always wanted to talk about a mangaka that's probably influenced this podcast a little more than I thought it would have. Arina Tanemura. Arina Tanemura is one of many shoujo mangaka out there. One of the most prolific mangaka out there that's started since she was a little girl, and ever since then she has started to find more of her passion through drawing and such. Of course, while her drawing is nothing to seize at, there is something about it that screams. Despite the shoujo-esque feel to her art style, which is mostly big eyes and everything, usually her stories fall around the topic of doing something mature. And yes, before you ask, I'm gonna define, about the word mature in a bit for her works, but for right now, I think it's a safe bet that her works really did catch my attention. I didn't even notice any of her works until I was in my early 20s when the pandemic was still hitting, but even then, her works really started to inspire me to what created this podcast as well. This and, well, Sailor Moon, if it's anything to judge by. However, I myself can't really talk about all of Arina Tanemura's works because, well, by the time of making this recording, only 2 of her works have made it to the screen, and honestly, aside from that, none of her other works have. It makes sense since most of them are one-shots, but even then, I feel pretty bad that only 2 of her works has started so far. So we might as well start things off with the series that started it off with me getting into her works, Phantom Thief Jeanne. Phantom Thief Jeanne is one of the few manga that actually got adapted. Released in 1999 to 2000, it was actually animated by Toei Animation, which, given the fact that this was during the time when Toei was still trying to find more Magical Girl shows to adapt, yeah, this is one case where you can definitely tell that they still had everything going for it. But before you say anything, yes, I did point this out in my Saint Tail video, and yes, we're going to talk about this here series in of itself, however. That being said, what makes Phantom Thief Jeanne stand out a little more is its history. I don't know if it's just me, but the history behind it goes beyond that. Despite being animated in Japan and actually having popularity there, it also was inspired here to be someplace else. See, for some reason, the series itself didn't make it anywhere outside of Japan and Germany. No, I'm not kidding. Germany actually did air this here series, and it did seem like they rerun on it for a long time, but I can't really confirm that because I'm not from Germany, but it seemed like a lot of people from there seem to enjoy it. However, with this anime, I can't really talk about the German dub due to one thing. While you can find the German dub on YouTube, they don't really have all of the available episodes on there. And those who have more of a German accent or something like that, or sometimes a combination of understanding Germany, I'm not going to talk about it for obvious reasons because I can't really speak it that well despite having a little bit of blood to it. And what's more, I'm just not the kind of person who would talk about something like that. So we're gonna have to talk about it with the English subtitles. And I do apologize in advance, but like I said, this video's been overdue long enough. But for better or for worse, let's get into Phantom Thief Jeanne, see if she steals the show like Saint Tail, and defy why I'm defending it despite its flaws. Our series begins with our main character, Maron, who happens to be a 16-year-old student and who also is a gymnast. However, one day, along with her best friend, and Miyako is actually obsessed with catching the thief, to Thief Jeanne, who is actually the reincarnation of Joan of Arc. Jeanne is the identity of Maron, and as you can probably guess from there, but yeah, Miyako is doing everything she can in order to catch this thief once and for all, even if Maron has to do everything she can to avoid being caught in anything in any ways. However, she's almost never alone when doing it because soon afterwards we meet up with our other character, Chiaki, who's also the identity of Sinbad. However, Miyako doesn't know that Jeanne and Sinbad are actually Maron and Chiaki respectively. Usually we have him and Access would go ahead and tell them where these here demons are so they can seal them up. Yeah, where Saint Tail is basically about how it's stealing the artifact back and giving it back to its rightful owner. This one's actually sealing the demons away so they won't possess anyone and they won't get cold as a result. Usually using pins in order to kiss as a checkmate, and from there on, this series itself really does that. While the first season is more episodic, the second season in of itself goes into the category of being more of a storyline, cohesive story. And as you can probably guess from there, Jeanne has to do everything she can in order to steal these demons before they start taking over everyone all at once. So, like I said, this year's series actually has another magical girl that goes into the magical thief category. But that's not always a bad thing. However, by the time I'm making this video, I will say while I have watched both Saint Tail and Phantom Thief Jeanne just to compare the two, I think it's a safe bet that so many people seem to be up in arms and saying that they're both similar in their own ways. If you were to help me describe these here two into itself anyways, then it's not hard to see why. But honestly, if you want me to compare the two together, I guess I can do that, considering that both have magical thieves into them, yet at the same time they have them in different ways. But let's go over what they have in common first. For what it's worth, aside from the magical girls being thieves and everything, you can definitely tell there were some things that they have in common. Both are magical thieves. They have to do all they can before they get caught by the police. They usually delve in a note to someplace, so then they track down where the thief is getting headed into, and also the fact that both have characters that are very obsessed in capturing them despite that anyways. However, Saint Tail in of itself, I think a lot of people like to think that it's a little better than Phantom Thief Jeanne, whereas Phantom Thief Jeanne is basically better than that series, and they go on saying their own art. Now, I realize that some people could say that they probably did that so they can at least interpret which one's the better, but if you've known my channel for quite some time, then you already know my rules. I don't care which is better as long as I'm being occupied by them. That being said, I will say that Phantom Thief Jeanne and Saint Tail do have their corners into themselves, so let's get into something that I think it's about time I discuss with you guys. See, I don't really do this, but I think I have to in part of this video, because if I don't, someone's gonna reach out in my throat just to say so already. So let's go over something I need to address. In Saint Tail, I can at least say there is one thing I can definitely say. It's a lot more episodic, and for what it's worth, that can work one of two ways for some people. If you are into episodic shows, you might like Saint Tail a little more, and it's a little more lighthearted despite its intense moments. But as Phantom Thief Jeanne, while yes, it does start off episodic, it's also worth noting that they also do something that we all need to address. They go into the mature category. And yes, this is where I have to put my flamingo flippers down, because I hate to bring this up whenever someone brings up the word mature. So let's go over it. See, whenever someone brings up the word mature, every time I hear the word mature, a lot of people always seem to have this notion where, oh, you mean that it's edgy, and it goes over to the top where they have only for adults to enjoy. That means no one can watch it except that mature demographic, right? And to that I say, do you even know what the word mature means? I mean, granted, whenever someone brings that up, a lot of people always expect it to be more for adults, and only for adults. As someone who watched Phantom Thief Jeanne as of now, because back then I did try to watch this, but I forgot where I left off, I can say that the mature rating does vary every now and then, but just because something's mature doesn't mean it's always going to be edgy. You're free to do that if you want to, because there's nothing wrong with having edginess in a mature series. But what I am saying, on the other hand, is that that's not all there is to the table. If you were to help me describe Phantom Thief Jeanne, I would just say they delve into something with more serious topics. For example, Maron herself is not always that happy-go-lucky character. Like, yeah, she does wear a smile on her face when doing so, but she's not all of what she appears to be. See, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but Maron actually lives alone, and thus, as a 6-year-old girl, her parents are not with her. And but before you say, oh, her parents died, that's another cliche to the table. No, thankfully they don't go through that route. At least I hope they didn't go through that route in the manga. But I did see a few pages in there, so I might have to spoil some things here and there. And before you say anything, yeah, you're gonna have to cut me off when doing so, but let's get this out of the way. See, her parents didn't die. For what I can tell, her mother's on a business trip, whereas her father, while I don't want to say he's a bad guy, it seems like he has some issues, as with most people, I'm sure of. But I think it's only safe to say that when it comes to Phantom Thief Jeanne's own story, it goes without saying that Maron's parents are contemplating whether or not they wanted to get into a divorce, and Maron wants them both together so they can be with her. Although keep in mind, Maron's been alone since she was 10 years old. So in other words, 6 years. What the fuck, guys? You didn't take your daughter with you? Granted, I know she was a little kid and everything, but Jesus fucking Christ, you mean to tell me that you're gonna leave your little kid alone? I don't know if it's just me, but I'm starting to realize this is a thing with Japan. Kotaro Lives Alone did this as well, and that kid was only 4 years old. And I don't want to say this, considering that I don't know how it works in any sort of way, but dear lord, I would have been pretty cooped up after my parents just left me. Oh, you poor baby, you got left alone from your parents. How sad is that? And I'm being dead serious when I say this, but come on, guys. You gotta be that cold-hearted to do so. Sure, I can be cold-hearted too, but only when I want to be. This is just uncalled for. Though, admittedly, I will say in the anime, they don't really call her that often. I guess from my knowledge, they only call her, like, what? Once, maybe twice, and that was only from the mother's side. I did look up the pages just to see if it actually did have something with it, and despite only finding very few pages online, it does look like an interesting read on my part, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. But honestly, if you're someone like me, I will get to what I think about shoujo manga by the end of this video, because, oh boy, it's a doozy. But honestly, the pages I've seen so far do look like they actually had someone taking a blog and saying that this is not what you expect from a series like this, despite what it may appear to be. I realize that not a lot of everyone is going to read the manga, if anything, but even with that said, I have to at least say they had a lot going for it, because in this case, like I said, only the mother, while checking on her, they did establish that it seems like they only had her check up on her daughter, and while the father, I guess he does check up on her every once in a while too, but not as often. But honestly, it's really cold when the anime doesn't do that a lot. If you need me to spell it out for you, basically what I'm trying to say here is that the anime, they rarely, if ever, call to see if their daughter's alright. They do call, like, what? Like, maybe twice, maybe 3 times at most, and after that they don't do anything just to visit her or something like that. Seriously, the most you're gonna get is a picture frame and some demons looking like them, despite them not really being her parents and everything. But here I am saying, geez Louise, is this really what you're gonna do? Just up and right abandon your daughter and not give her a call, if anything? I get that this is supposed to delve into what's loneliness and everything, but even with that said, I would have still prefer it if you just give her a little more breathing room to see why you didn't call her every once in a while. The only time we did get to see that Maron actually does delve into loneliness is when she's moping her to herself, and even then, I will say it is more realistic than she they may think it is. I'm not saying this entire series is realistic, because there are some what the fuck moments, especially, like, say, the transformation sequence. Seriously, if you ever on YouTube just to watch the transformation sequence, while they're not anything to be taken seriously, one of which actually has her jumping off a building just so she can transform into the Jeanne d'Arc counterpart that she is. And can I just say, for the record, I'm glad no one watches her doing this, because they would have went like, oh my god, someone is jumping off a building, we might call the ambulance. And honestly, while that may be a bit of a stretch to do and everything, but I don't want to get into too much of that, because, well, let's get into something I need to address. So, can I talk about something else for a change? I know I keep rambling on about the manga, how people react about this here series, but I also want to talk about something else about the manga itself. When I researched this when I was in my early 20s, so buckle up. So, I don't know if you guys know this, but whenever I look up on this manga or anime just to see if it's any good despite its flaws, I will say that in my experience, when I looked up the manga, someone actually said that this was the worst magical girl series out there, and I started overreacting a lot about what happens in the story, and I don't even know where to start. I guess I could start off by saying that this is probably the dumbest argument I've ever heard online. Like, seriously, it's like watching someone read something just once and they thought it was the worst thing out there. I wonder who would do such a thing. Being real with you here, I don't really think the anime is trying to make it the worst out there. But one thing that I will say is that saying that this is the worst magical girl series out there, and after seeing it, I don't agree with that. If you're going to make the argument that it is the worst, then I have to have more extended proof of it. Like, what makes it so bad? Is it because the characters are bad? Is it because the writing is dismissive? Is it because not a lot of it changes throughout the series? Or are we meant to assume that this is the worst experience that they've had in their lives? Because otherwise, I wouldn't know how to put it either way, other than the fact that this person just outright put in a wiki page, and I don't know if anyone watches anyone rant on something that's really abysmal unless they want to have rage bait on themselves. But what I am saying is that the manga itself is not anywhere the worst, and nor is the anime. It's flawed, sure, but just because something is flawed doesn't always mean it's bad. And in some cases, unless it's something that's heavily flawed. From what I can tell, the anime itself actually does have moments where the person was just overreacting, saying that Marin is lonely, and she doesn't confess about it. Which, given the fact that the anime and the manga explicitly said that the themes around it revolve around loneliness and how you're never alone, even when you have friends by your side, really goes without saying that really pisses me off anyways, when that person just said, this kid doesn't want to outright admit they're lonely. What the hell's wrong with them? Maybe it's because they have a hard time admitting it? Seriously, maybe it's just me and I know what's it like to hide under a mask, but even I know for a fact if you have a hard time admitting how you feel, it's going to affect you. And even with that said, keep in mind, her parents are not living with her. And even with that said, I don't know what's going on about it. But you may have realized something. I've been also talking about the manga and anime, comparing the two, and also talking about how these people overreacted and such, without talking about what the entire anime is like. Well, that's because I don't know what to say about it despite watching it. And I'm not saying as I don't like the anime. I do like it, but I think I may have underestimated my enjoyment when watching it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to call it the worst. I'm just going to call it somewhere decent, but I think we can talk about something that I need to address. And it's something that you guys may have realized something. Uh-oh. I don't normally talk about secret identities, but unlike a certain some user I could mention at the top of my head, let's talk about something that I don't normally talk about anyways. So, You know how most magical girls usually fall into the category of that they may look like their original counterpart just with a few more accessories here and there and with slight changes here and there? A lot of ways, a lot of people seem to think that magical girl shows are built differently than, say, superhero shows you may have seen every so often. But even with that said, one thing that kind of bothers me is how people always say that magical girls always have the same identity all the time and they never change their appearance, despite their few changes here and there. And I have to put my foot down and say that while I admit that is true, I think Phantom Thief Jeanne actually did something a little more different than what Saint Tail did. See, let's talk about Saint Tail's appearance for just a See, Saint Tail's appearance is actually one that a lot of people seem to think actually has a problem with, but can I just say for the record, while I don't necessarily have a huge problem with it like most people do, I can kind of see why some people would actually not like this idea. See, Saint Tail's appearance is actually something that, while you could argue the difference between them is that Mimi is actually one character who has her hair down, yet when she goes in her Saint Tail form, she has them up in a ponytail, but she turns her head around so no one can find out what her true face looks like. In some cases, this is kind of a double-edged sword, because you can still get caught if they check out who you really are, yet at the same time, I think it actually works in its favor, because you can actually make the argument that while Mimi doesn't want anyone to know who she is, she still manages to keep herself away and uses her tricks up her sleeve that she got from her father so she can get back the accessory it came from. What I'm saying is that Saint Tail actually made it intense, and while yes, the identity is still very distinctive from two different ways, you can still pull off the card and say that at least you know that there are similarities. Us, the audience, know that, but no one else does. So we can at least say that. However, where something like, say, Phantom Thief Jeanne came to the picture, I'm just gonna put my foot down and ask a big question. How can you tell these two are the same person? Maybe it's me thinking it a little bit and thinking that Maron's overreacting, but here I am saying that, Maron, you have light brown hair. Jeanne's counterpart to you has golden blonde hair. I think you both have very differences in both appearances, not just that, but the eye color and everything, or something else along those lines. Yet for some reason, Maron acts like all of this identity thing will just be blown away if she doesn't keep herself a secret. I mean, seriously, if you look at these two appearances, can you even tell if they were the same person? Maybe in personality I can kind of see in some cases, but even then, I just don't see what she's over thinking or something like that. Or maybe I'm just talking out of my ass like I always do. Either way, I don't think the identity itself is as noticeable as Saint Tail's or maybe something like Usagi to Tsukino, but I'm just saying that both of them just seem so different from each other that I don't think you can tell the same person anyways. Hell, when I started watching Phantom Thief Jeanne, I didn't know Jeanne was Maron, because both of them have very differences in themselves, and this is far from the only magical girl series that actually did. But I don't want to keep rambling about how these two who seem to have these things going on and on with each other. So I guess the only thing to do is talk about its anime, and while I did say it was decent, I mean in a way that I actually did enjoy it more than I thought it would have if it wasn't for the people bitching saying that it's the worst out there. If you want me to tell you a worse Magical Girls series, I highly recommend watching my podcast a little more and seeing which ones you can come up with. Seriously, cosplayers, Magical Girl sites come to mind when it comes to being the worst, because they didn't do anything with those ideas, they just put them in there because why not? But with Phantom Thief Jeanne, there are a few things I will say despite its flaws. I will say, let's talk about the animation. As for 1999 standards, when it comes to Toei animation, I think the animation looks really glossy and very flawless, to say the least anyways. You do get to see how beautifully detailed these characters looked and everything like that. And while this is kind of rare for Toei to do back then, I think they were still stepping up their game anyways. This was before the Precure franchise came to knocking on their door. But honestly, when it comes right down to it, I do like the animation. It is it really suits well for the overall series in of itself. While the animation is into anything that you call something for Toei, I still think they did pretty well of itself. It's just that I wish more people could have seen this series just to judge it for themselves. But like I said, the series only aired in Japan and Germany. Some people said there was an English dub, but let me tell you, there was none I could find of. Unless they did have in its lost media, but, well, there's a reason why you start seeing that every. But as the series goes on, I'm not gonna lie, like I said, the first season of itself seemed like they had a lot of things going for it when it comes to something like, say, they might as well make it into a more of an episodic feel, but it was also due to the characters' interactions with each other. Aside from Miyako going so far as to try and catch Jeanne already, there is another thing I have to bring up, Chiaki. Now, Chiaki's as Sinbad is actually something that doesn't get brought up a lot during magical girl couples and everything like that, or something in a relationship, but I have to say that Chiaki and Sinbad, while you could excuse Marwan's identity being more secretive, I think it's safe to say that Sinbad and Chiaki are kind of almost like two people in a haystack you can find easily. Like, seriously, the most you can say is that the only difference is them is their colored hairstyle, and maybe there are traits here and there, but other than that, I don't really think there's anything too different from the two counterparts with each other. Seriously, Chiaki's hair is more like a medium colored blue, whereas his Chiaki form is either like a silver blue or light blue. I'm going with light blue, fight me. And I think it's only safe to say that they're really going so far as out of their way just to say that Thief Jeanne actually does build this relationship up a bit, and more than it is. See, at first glance, when Chiaki first started coming to the same school as Marwan and Miyako, it does seem like there would be some sort of love triangle, even though Miyako liked Chiaki at first glance. Chiaki actually liked Marwan more, and despite perving a little bit because, well, there's a little fan service, not a lot, thankfully, but thankfully he does change throughout the series as time goes on. But here I am saying, dude, was that really necessary? She's 16. You're the same age as her, unless you're 1 year older or 17, but even so, creepy, dude. But I have to fully admit, these characters actually do seem like they were getting off, though. I don't think there's ever been time for me to mention this for now, but the first time I ever saw someone actually ship these two a lot more than they are would have to be an AMV video when I was watching something that I was going through when I was watching the AMVs in 2020 alone, and they had the song Unbreak My Heart by Toni Braxton, where I saw these two in itself. I highly recommend checking it out after watching the series, but I kind of had a spoil of myself when doing so. Then again, knowing me with how dumb I can be at times, that's really something I don't want anyone to think otherwise. And I did mention to Miyako a bit, so I think it's only fitting to talk about her. Miyako herself isn't a bad character either. She does have her moments where she is very short-tempered, and while her and Marwan are her childhood friends, and they still are to this day, Marwan actually does show she does care for Ichi. Yeah, that she might have more than what it is anyways, even if Nako's character can be a bit much at times. That's not to say she's a bad guy or anything, but let me tell you, a lot of people seem to think that she is one because she's always trying to do something to catch Jeanne, but personally, I don't think I would call her a bad guy. Misunderstood, yes, but not a bad guy. She's just trying to catch the thief and do something like the police force, like Asuka Jr. did in Saint Tail, and like Asuka Jr., she's just willing to do whatever she can in order to catch the thief anyways. It takes a lot to take a thief, now does it? And I did mention the fairies earlier, like Finn and Axas. And honestly, when you get right down to it, I think it's a safe bet that they really have a lot going for it as well anyways. But in the anime, they really seem like they had this, well, Finn didn't care for Axas too much, and it says that in the manga she had the same connection, but Axas does care for Finn in a lot of ways, so there's that going for it. By the way, I should probably mention this, but in episode 9, they did mention that there were different ranks of these here fairies. But for whatever reason, they never really had this in the anime. Maybe it wasn't that much important, or maybe they just didn't seem like it was necessary to go over what these fairies are, but I kind of feel like that was kind of a shame because I would have liked to see what kind of fairies there were, because they said that there were four different classes of fairies, but the only two fairies we see here are Finn and Access. Other than those two, we don't really see any of the others. So I'm guessing the only reason they didn't put in the manga is because they didn't think it was that well established. But either way, I still think it was pretty cool. I mean, that I wish they could have done something with said fairies, because let's be real here. I don't know if it's me being a bit of a woman child, but I'm kind of a sucker for fairies, if anything, especially towards Magical Girl. But speaking of which, we might as well talk about the bad guys of this series, and why I feel like it's a bit of a flimsy way of saying it, but screw it. So if you don't want this spoil for you, I do premiere my Magical Girl podcast every now and then, so when this happens to be done or over with, though, I do apologize if I do spoil something for you, but honestly, this is kind of a flimsy way of saying it. So let's talk about the demons, for example, because I really feel like this is kind of a weird way of saying it, so let's talk about it. So I mentioned that there were demons, but honestly we get two of them that you think that they would at least be the bad guys, one of which being Noah Claude, who starts off disguised as a teacher in the second season, and from then on he starts using that to take advantage of Jeanne's naivety so he can use it to fool her. Now, I will say, for someone like this guy, I thought at first he would actually be the main bad guy of this year's series, but no, he's not really the final bad guy. Even if, yes, he does seem very charismatic and stuff, but honestly, I kind of feel glad they don't really do what he did in the manga, because, oh boy, they really went more lighthearted they did in the anime than they did in the manga, because for some reason in the manga he went so far as to S.A. Jeanne. He run its own form. So yeah, I'm glad they toned it down or anything like that, but if anything, I'm glad they didn't do that in the anime, because otherwise I would have another way of looking at Dios from Utena, like what he did to her in that series, and I'm not having that happen. So was he the bad guy? No, he was not the bad guy. So who else would it? Or maybe it was this character, Mix, who happens to be this demon-like little girl who eats these little candy drops whenever she eats them, so she can suck the good energy from the humans, so they can get possessed by the dark evil demons inside. That in of itself is actually pretty cool, and I never thought they could do something like that. But like I said, no, she's not the bad guy either. So you might be asking yourself, who could be the bad? I mean, in the manga they had a variety of villains, but in the anime we don't really get that much of any villains anyways. Aside from the demon who looks like he could be the main bad guy of this year's series, you're not going to be ready when I say this, but it's a spoiler anyway, so either recommend clicking off or basically just hear me out, because honestly, you're not ready for this. Why, it's none other than Finn. Yeah, Finn turns out to be the bad guy. Like, are you for real? This cute little fairy who started out pretty nice to have Maron just to go ahead and seal the demons, and then all of a sudden she says this just to spite Maron the whole time. You have Finn be the main bad guy? Really? I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I would have preferred it if you chose any of the other bad guys from the manga, but I guess this is why some people start saying that this is a somewhat loose adaptation of the manga into the anime. And you know, as much as I don't like saying this, I really feel like they could have had so many other bad guys, yet they had Finn. I get that maybe she was possessed by evil, but get this, the only way to turn herself back to normal is by going back in time just to seal the demons. So I'm not gonna go and rage and all this other stuff, because I know a lot of people on the internet have already done that when it comes to time traveling stuff, but I feel like I should put my foot down and say this once and for all. I don't know what to say about time travel. Personally, I don't have anything against time traveling as long as it actually has something to the table. I mean, hell, Back to the Future did that pretty effectively from what I can tell. But I feel like even with that said, it just kind of forces me in to say that Finn being a bad guy just never really went with me. I mean, yeah, in the second season, she said that she was going to be going away just to say that all the angels are sealed, but all of a sudden they weren't all sealed as they go into the second season, which, yeah, tough luck on that. But even with that said, I'm not going to say this ending was a doozy, but it did kind of leave me far edge of my seat saying, that's really what we had to do. And I'm not asking this here series to be realistic. That's not the point of this here podcast. What I am saying is that it just makes me wonder why. The series itself is pretty flawed, sure, but I wouldn't call it the worst out there like some people would have. But I must muster up and say that despite its flaws, I can't grow to not like Phantom Thief Jeanne. Up there with Pretty Tear, I can definitely assure you that this is definitely the case where the series itself is one of those cases where I still enjoy it, but only when I'm in the mood for it. That is until you start realizing how many people are probably going to go up in arms at me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Phantom Thief Jeanne is a bad series, far from it. But the only way to get access to the anime is if you go through what I did and go find a certain website. And as for this here manga itself, I think we need to address something because I was saving this for the end of the video. So let's talk about the manga for a sec. I'm starting to notice that when it comes to having something like these here shoujo manga, the only way you're going to find the manga elsewhere if you want to read it for yourself is through used copies. And I hate saying that. Not because they're expensive, but because of how much a lot of people are probably wondering what's so great about this here series when people do get to watch it, and even then they still have to pay a lot of money for it. You know, the more I look at shoujo manga, the starting question I keep asking is, why is it that shoujo always seems to get overlooked and shonen gets more popularity? I guess that's the thing when it comes to shoujo these days. Look, I'm not saying that you can't really enjoy Phantom Thief Jeanne. As for myself, I enjoyed Phantom Thief Jeanne, but I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I thought I would have, given the fact that this year's series seemed to have a lot of things going for it. And before you say anything, I don't want to say that this is a bad adaptation. The best way to describe it is that they just wanted to put in what they thought was a better story and just roll with what they had. I'm sure that Arina Tanemura herself is fine with whatever she wants to add for herself, but let me tell you, for starting a series like this, I wouldn't call it the worst out there like some people would have. I wouldn't call it terrible anyways. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, but I would call it somewhere around, say, it's decent, but it still has its flaws here and there. And I do feel like that's what I think of Phantom Thief Jeanne overall. And you know, as much as some people are probably pissed off if they really have to hear me out when I say that, I don't want to say that this is a series that I wouldn't recommend watching it for yourself. I hear some people enjoyed it, including people who did enjoy the German dub more than its Japanese dub, but like I said, you can only find the episodes you can find on YouTube. So, whatever episodes you can find on there, be my guest, but you're not going to find any subtitles of it unless you go through captions, which I'm not so sure how many people do that, but I thought I'd bring that up anyways. Phantom Thief Jeanne is not a bad series, but it's far from being the greatest out there. And at least to my... Yeah, I guess I'm trying to say is that Phantom Thief Jeanne is also a series that I actually had high hopes for when starting to watch this. Again, I started watching this during the quarantine days because as someone who was trying to find more magical girl shows in my collection, I wanted to find out what I could out of this year's series when doing so. I'm sorry if this video turned out to more like, say, explain between both of them just to see what it's like from here on there, but honestly I wouldn't know how to put it either way. If you are interested in the manga, like I said, you can only find used copies of it on eBay, but if you're someone who wants to watch the anime, you're gonna have to find it through a website you can find the series, just so you know what you're going in. But if you can read the subtitles, that is, because the subtitles, Unlike Nurse Angel Rebecca SOS, where the subtitles were kind of blurry, they were actually kind of make me colorblind almost. And I'm not even colorblind to begin with. What I'm saying is that the series itself is easy to find if you know where to look, but I'm just gonna say it. I enjoy Phantom Thief Jeanne, just not as much as I thought it would have anyways. And beyond that, I'm glad that I actually got to see it. So that's enough for the first Arina Tanemura series. But don't think we're going to be stopping right there as the only Arina Tanemura series, because next time, whenever I come back to do this series, because I'm still watching it, we're going to look at another Arina Tanemura series, but this time you might want to grab your tissues, because, oh boy, it's going to be a little heavier than Phantom Thief Jeanne was. But until then, I thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay flamingotastic. I'll see you all.